My name is Peter Steeves. I'm a professor of philosophy here at DePaul, and it's also my privilege to be the director of the DePaul Humanities Center. I'm so pleased to welcome you to the first event in our 2018-19 season. As tonight, as part of our In Conversation with Great Minds series, we welcome the amazing Ann Dowd. It'll be my pleasure to bring Ann out to the stage later this evening, but we first begin, as we always begin here at the Humanities Center, by acknowledging the traditional territory upon which we gather this evening. Long before Europeans arrived, varied and numerous native people sought to walk gently on this land. They offered assistance to the first European travelers to this territory, sharing their knowledge for survival and living a good life. Among others, the Potawatomi, Ojibwe, Miami, and Illinois inhabited what is now this part of Chicago. While we here today have no power to honor the treaties that were signed, we do recognize that these treaties were brokered under some duress and deception. So it's our hope tonight to honor the good faith with which the native people of the region entered into these treaties. As Potawatomi Chief Matea is purported to have said at the signing of the 1821 Treaty of Chicago, quote, "This is a small piece of land, and if we give it away, what will become of us? The Great Spirit who has provided it for our use allows us to keep it. We should incur his anger if we bartered it away. If we had more, you should get more. But our land has been wasting away ever since the white people became our neighbors, and we now have hardly enough left to cover the bones of our tribe." In solidarity with Chief Matea, we recognize the history and legacy of this subjugation, as well as the enduring presence today of Native Americans among our faculty, staff, student body, and community. And it's thus that we seek a new relationship with the original peoples of this land, one based on true respect, as we also reaffirm our general and driving dedication to finding ways, both institutionally and personally, for the work that we do at the DePaul Humanities Center to be a model of what it means to be dedicated to making our society a more enlightened and just place for everyone in our community. Okay, so in a few moments, we'll begin our screening, a great episode of the HBO show The Leftovers, one of Ann Dowd's masterpieces, really. For those of you who have not seen the series or haven't seen it in a while, just a few quick words of introduction then to get us all up to speed. The Leftovers ran for 3 seasons from 2013 to 2017 and explored how the world was dealing with something called the sudden departure. 3 years before the show starts up, 2% of the world has mysteriously vanished, as in people literally disappearing right in front of the eyes of others. In the days that follow, when it's clear that their friends and family members aren't coming back, some people believe it is religious in nature, as in the rapture. Others turn to science for an explanation, but there are no answers that are forthcoming. The government creates a Department of Sudden Departure to study those who disappeared, see if they have anything in common. The most interesting response, however, comes from those members of society who have joined a group called the Guilty Remnant. Patty Levin, played by Ann Dowd, is the leader of the local chapter. Members of the Guilty Remnant wear all white, chain smoke, and take a vow of silence. They're committed to being living reminders of the horror of what took place, never letting anyone forget and possibly move on. The Guilty Remnant apparently feel as if life has no meaning, if death can come at any moment. And 3 years after the departure, too many people are pretending like things can get back to normal. Standing outside others' homes, smoking and looking accusatory, pretty much everyone hates the members of the Guilty Remnant. Kevin Garvey, played by Justin Theroux, is the local chief of police, who perhaps hates Patty most of all, as she apparently helped convince his wife to leave her family and join the cult-like group. So Kevin's trying to move on with a new relationship, though Nora, his love interest, has her own problems, and Kevin's daughter is not keen on her mother being replaced. While the Guilty Remnant planned a devastating secret action to commemorate the anniversary of the sudden departure, Patty goes missing. And Kevin has been having blackouts, waking up later, unaware of what he did during those missing hours. So here, in episode 8 of the first season, everything starts to come together. It's one of the finest pieces of ensemble acting of our time, and Ann Dowd is right at the center of it, the high watermark for others. With an episode entitled K-Row, this is The Leftovers. Pretty amazing, huh? So we're going to be welcoming our very special guest to the stage momentarily. But by means of introduction, I'd like to take a couple of minutes to try to speak briefly about the singular talent of Ann Dowd, at least as well as a philosopher such as myself can. First, the mere reporting of some of the highlights of Ann's career so far. Mere only in the sense that it takes less philosophical effort, certainly not in the sense that the highlights are not numerous and pretty amazing. Since graduating from DePaul Theater School with an MFA in acting in 1982, Ann has gone on to acclaimed work and has gained a reputation as an actor who sets the standard and raises the bar for everyone around her, regardless of the project. On stage, Ann has appeared in such plays as John Patrick Shanley's Doubt, Chekhov's The Seagull, and George Bernard Shaw's Candida, for which she received the Clarence Dermot Award for her Broadway debut in 1993. On film, Ann has been in such fantastic projects as Philadelphia, playing Tom Hanks' character's sister, in Apt Pupil as Brad Renfro's character's mother, and as Natalie Portman's character's mother as well in Garden State. To skip inappropriately over years of important work, in the last 6 years alone, she starred in Compliance, for which she received 9 major award nominations, won 2 of them, and in a just world would have an Oscar for her portrayal of a fast food restaurant manager convinced to do some questionable things by an authoritative voice on the other end of the phone. She's been in Steven Soderbergh's Side Effects, in St. Vincent with Bill Murray, in Captain Fantastic with Viggo Mortensen and Steve Zahn. In this year's terrific American Animals as the librarian who's attacked during an ill-planned robbery, and in one of the best and surely creepiest movies of 2018, Hereditary, as a member of a grief support group who really knows her way around a seance. On television, Ann has been in, let's just say, everything you've ever liked for the last 2 decades. That episode of The X-Files where the kids learn how to move even faster than the Flash? Yep. A mom in The Incomparable Freaks and Geeks? Yeah, that as well. A murderous doctor, a baby kidnapper, a homicidal vigilante in every permutation of Law and Order that's ever existed? That just scratches the surface. Ann played the sort of professor that Lena Dunham's character in Girls always needed in the penultimate episode of that series. And Ann was also there in the first season finale of True Detective, when Matthew McConaughey's flat circle of time eventually led us to a house of horror, where Ann was so brilliantly and disturbingly playing the backwoods, mentally challenged, incestuously abused sister of the main villain. And then, of course, there's The Leftovers, which we just saw a bit of, and for which she was nominated for an Emmy, and a little show called The Handmaid's Tale, where Ann's portrayal of Aunt Lydia has earned her 5 major award nominations, including Golden Globe and SAG nods, and a Critics' Choice Award, as well as a long-deserved Emmy win. Now, I've been speaking for 3 minutes, and I barely scratched the surface of her resume and achievements. So let me use the remaining introductory time in an attempt to say something about the meaning of this corpus, and why we're so lucky to live in a world where Ann brings her talent to bear on so many great projects. Like many of us here, I've been enjoying Ann Dowd's work for several years, and as I try to think about what it is that makes her so compelling, such a brilliant actor, I often find myself coming back not only to her portrayal of Patty in The Leftovers, but to a truth that Patty seems to have unlocked: the importance of the presence of absence. When we think carefully about things that are missing or departed, a curious reality emerges. That which is absent is never really completely gone. Instead, absent things continue to be experienced just as much as present things, only we experience them in the mode of being presently absent. Presence and absence are not binaries, not opposites, but constitute interdependent modes of how consciousness engages with the world. So think of what it means to lose someone that we love. It's not as if they are then absent from our lives when they die, completely gone. The work of mourning would be so easy if this were the case. Their role in our lives would just be over. Indeed, it's all much harder and more painful because we continue to experience our lost loved ones, but precisely as no longer here, as presently absent. There's not an erasure, there is no lack of experience, no clean slate. We experience them as never again to be presently present, here, but here in a way that we wish they were not here. And so they remain, still in our thoughts, still in our lives, still present in their absence, still still. This is a deep phenomenological point, having to do with how things present themselves to consciousness. But Patty, I think, understands this. She knows that the world cannot pretend that the sudden departure never took place, that those who disappeared can be forgot, erased, ignored. The Leftovers, of course, is not really just about a rapture-like event. It's about death in general for all of us. The guilty remnant have realized what we all should realize on some level, that death can take away those we love at any moment. And there is no reason to it, no rationality, no way to make it explicable so that we can understand it, make it come to sense. To live is to be pointed toward death, to be surrounded by death. And indeed, our only experience of death is by means of the death of others. Our own death is not something we can ever experience because we can't thematize it by making it into a thing. We don't come out the other side of still alive, having gone through it such that we can turn around, look back and say, oh, so that's what it is to die. The death of those we love is thus the only glimpse that we have of our own finitude, something that, the moment we try to look at it, dissolves into shadow. But presence and absence are not only there in death and mourning, they're two sides of the coin of every act of something appearing to consciousness. So as you look at me up here on stage right now, you can't see my legs behind this podium, but you still experience them. You don't for a moment think that I'm a legless apparition floating a few feet off the ground back here. You necessarily experience my legs directly, even right now, even with them out of view. You experience them as present, but presently absent, because you don't physically see them. You can't see the back of this podium either, but you take it to have a back. You don't think it's a flat, two-dimensional cartoon surface. You take the back to be presently absent, just as I take the front part of this podium to be presently absent from me right now. This is what it means to experience wholes and unities, things that are complete. If you were to move around the podium, different parts would come into present presence, other parts move into present absence, a shifting manifold of presence becoming absence, absence becoming presence, with the podium as a whole always being the object of your consciousness. Think then about the silence between spoken words that allows words to shape themselves and come into meaning when we hear them. Think about the blank space on a page between written words that does the same. Think about the stillness in a dancer's body that allows motion to become meaningful, allows the dancing to take place at all. Think about all of the experiences you might not be having directly with your senses right now, but are still making it possible for you to have a meaningful experience because in their absence, they constitute all that is present. So, what does this have to do with great acting then? I'd like to suggest that what Ann always does, so consistently, with such dexterity, talent, and unqualified skill, is make the people she plays obvious and complicated wholes, fully present in all of their glorious absent presence as well as present presence. And this is something that's rare indeed. I think about every time that I've seen Ann in something and how everything about that character was so immediate and real, just in the first few seconds that Ann is on screen typically. In a single sentence uttered, a single look, a single slouch of her shoulders, there, immediately, a whole person. How does an actor make another person fully present in a single moment? Especially a person who doesn't exist like you and I exist, and thus doesn't really have two legs, a backside, a history, a life outside the narrative. One way, I suppose, is that before the performance takes place, someone imagines all of that for one's character, to create a backstory and envision existence beyond the scripted fiction. For some, I know, this is part of their process as an actor. Perhaps Ann even does this to some extent. But still, I don't think it's that simple. Perhaps part of the mystery is to be found in the difference between imagining what is absent and actually experiencing what is absent. Imagination, sometimes, is overrated. You aren't imagining that I have legs. As we've established, you're experiencing my legs directly, it's just that they're presently absent. An act of imagination has a different structure than all of the other experiences that are direct. You would have to imagine right now what I might look like dressed up in a Gilead Handmaid costume, but you're not imagining that I have legs. Perhaps what we sense as part of the mastery of a truly excellent actor is that she doesn't imagine what she can't immediately see in her character. She directly experiences it. And thus, so do we. No imagining needed, because there it is. We know, don't we, that Aunt Lydia lived a past where she made some personal mistakes that she regrets, perhaps was not always treated with respect by others, and now is fully committed to making the world a better place, given her own conception of what that means. We know all of that soon after meeting her. We don't need to be told it, because Ann shows it to us. In True Detective, when Ann's character is first seen, we instantly know how hard life has been for this mentally challenged shut-in. But then, just moments later, Ann alters the tone of her voice for a single sentence, and we immediately realize that her character actually understands more than anyone knows about what's going on. The whole person materializing in the reading of a single line. We know the depth of Patty's sadness and nihilism in The Leftovers, and how that emptiness has been filled with a singular commitment to a cause. And we know all of that from Ann's silence, the look in her eyes, the way her muscles tense. Like the very best dancers who use their whole body at all times, who know that the body must be sad if a character or a dance is sad. Ann knows that the flesh knows, and she dances the part of Patty to its forlorn, inevitable conclusion. In Compliance, not only is Ann's whole character there in person the moment she appears, but we have here an excellent example of what it means to be a whole person, and that we are in part constituted by such things as class, race, sex, culture, all of the other people, the other intersubjective subjectivities that make us complete. And because of Ann's talent, we immediately know a lot about this working class woman and her background. Without it ever being said, we know that being the manager of this fast food restaurant is a marker of a kind of success for her. That her only imaginable larger dream is to be maybe a regional manager, but even that's a bit out of reach. In the tone of voice and the expression in her body as she worries about pickles, we know that woman. Her priorities and her aspirations, her resignations and acquiescences. And there on screen in present absence is also the truth that patriarchal authority abuses all women every day, which is to say that there in Ann's work are the ghosts of our own compliances. I think then that this is all, at least in part, what makes Ann's work so compelling, what makes her such a virtuoso. She's never played a villain because no one ever really thinks of herself as a villain. She's never used a character for her own purposes as an actor. She's never given us anything other than a real person. What she offers us might philosophically be called a phenomenological whole. It is undeniably worth calling artistic brilliance. But perhaps most importantly, it's also simply what we used to call truth. I heard Ann say in an interview once that the role she has never played, yet hopes to take on someday, is Joan of Arc. Let me conclude then by saying that I hope indeed that Ann gets to play this role, because she wouldn't inhabit it as a myth or a martyr, because Ann taking it on is surely my one best chance to get close to meeting the real Joan of Arc. In fact, I not only look forward to seeing this happen, but typecasting all but demands it. Joan of Arc, after all, is a model for others, a symbol for being true, steadfast, and brilliant in both her commitment and her work. How is Ann any different as a model, or in her talent and her commitment? Joan takes up so much historical and ideological space, even though she fought and lived for only a short while. We think of her as, and she truly is, a major historical figure, though her time on the world stage was short. She rode into battle, and then when persecuted, changed history with a simple declaration: she would not speak, she would not recant her faith. And, no matter whether she's the star or a supporting character, fills the narrative space of anything in which she acts. We remember it in retrospect as her project, regardless of how long she was on screen. And with a simple look or a refusal to speak, she changes everything. Joan lived in the margins of mainstream French society, yet also interacted with established leaders of the world, and has shined in independent films and projects, yet also is an integral part of the art that's most affecting our culture today. Neither one is content to take orders passively from men, or to lay down her sword when confronted with the patriarchy's army, and both have plunged themselves fearlessly into a world where the noblest hearts tend to suffer, yet by just being themselves, just being their faithful, luminous selves, have risen as models to which we might aspire. It's an equivalence in so many ways. And plus, If we're really keeping score, Ann has one more Emmy than Joan. Friends, it's my sincere pleasure to be able to say to you, please join me in welcoming to the stage, Saint Ann Dowd.
I'm so overwhelmed by what you said.
Oh.
I could just lay down and weep, honestly.
Oh, that's very kind.
I absolutely. Oh, thank you.
That's too kind. Thank you so much for being
Kind
here.
of you ever in your life. I hope he says that for all of you. He writes your speech. For you about yourselves. My goodness, you never have a moment of what? Lack of confidence ever, would you?
Well, it's not a lesser. It was easy to do. Just say the truth.
Thank you.
So it's good to have
Oh, my
you here.
goodness. It's a great pleasure. Thank you for coming. I know you're very busy. You're working very hard.
And you as well. Are you coming from filming the
Well,
third
we're
season
going to
of
go into
Handmaid?
the filming on October 22nd, which is when we begin filming. And so we will go until May. That's generally how long it takes. 6 and then some.
Right. Well, I know you're super busy, so it's good to have you
Oh, it's
here.
a great pleasure.
Do you mind if we start to talk a little bit about your process? Because I was just speculating there about what that
Oh, I
process
wish
might
that
be.
was my process. I'm going to start doing that.
I think you are doing that, even if it's not a conscious thing.
But I read in an interview with you once where you said that you think of the character you play as being a person that you have a relationship with.
Yes, sir.
And maybe it's even like a friendship, and you have to get to know that person. Can you say something more about that? How literal is that?
You know, when I was in college, I was a pre-med student. I was going to be a surgeon. That was my dream. I did plays too, which I loved, but I didn't realize you could actually then do what you love. Do you know what I'm saying? You all know that already. But the way you approach pre-med and physics and chemistry and organic, all those things, is just straight on study, and then study some more. And you will get, and there's one answer, and you arrive at that one answer. It's not, well, kind of, sort of, it's this one. Well, I thought that's how I could approach acting when I went to the theater school here. Of course you can't. You can't do that. But it took me a very long time to figure that out. I thought, no, I'm going to know her. The reason I'm going to know her is that I'm going to study the script, and I'm going to write down everything about her that you know. Now, one must do one's script work. Steve can attest to that, of course, such a wonderful actor. But you have to give it time, and it is a relationship. And they're real and alive, and they will find their lives in the way that we can express them. Actors, that's our gift, I would say, or our privilege. So it took me time to realize you can't beat this into submission, my dear, because the character will never let you know her. It's like a friendship. Tell me what's the matter with you. No, tell me your problems. What do you want? You know, you're going to run, aren't you? You're going to say, first of all, run your business, like they don't like you. So it's a respectful time to say, you know, this is, here I am and here you are, and let's see how we do. Tell me what you can. You can trust me. And so I give much more space to that now than I ever did. Which is not to say, the text is always first, isn't it? Because that's, we begin with the writing. And then of course, you find a way to connect to that character. And then you say, come in now and help me. Show me you if you can, and I'll take care of you. And I found that to be very meaningful, for lack of a better word. It's a joyous thing when you have those moments when you think, oh, I can let it. You know, in the theater it's very hard, scared to death of theater, mind you. Wrong, you'd think by now. But every night is, you know, Everest-like. And I can tell you that maybe in a course of perhaps a 3-month run or something, I could count maybe 5 performances where I just say, darling, let go. It's all good. And then that's a ticket to heaven. I mean, because then what happens is you're one with the audience. And they don't even know it, but they know something happened, that someone has come to sit beside them. That's a great thing. I'd like to find out how to do that more. But anyway, I'm going off topic.
No, not at all. There's so much in there. Just the way that you were talking about the character, really as another person, I'm fascinated by the process of that, how that happens, because I think for me, not being trained in this and not having any talent at this at all, that I think, well, on some level, it must be the case that it, of course, is you. And so you're kind of doubling yourself in a certain way, but then allowing that other part of you to not be controlled by you in some way, and to encounter yourself. And as you were just talking, I was thinking of this little book by C.S. Lewis. You know the C.S. Lewis? Yeah. So sort of toward the end of his life, in the early 60s, he wrote a book under a pseudonym about his wife's death. His wife had died from cancer. And of course, Lewis was a very religious man, but this just threw him. He had questioned his faith and everything was falling apart. And so he published essentially diaries about him trying to deal with mourning his wife, but he wanted it under a different name because it wasn't C.S. Lewis-like. But one of the things that he says in it that just occurred to me while you were speaking was that as he has conversations with his wife after she's gone, that they're memories that he's using to construct them. And he is comforted by this, but then he says this very haunting thing, that he worries that the more and more distant he gets from her, that that construct is just part of him and is more like a puppet, that he's pulling her strings. She's not there to push back against him. And so she really is completely gone in a sense, and it's just a kind of narcissism where he's just talking to himself. So to be a great actor, as you're suggesting, you really have to have this conversation. How does that distance be done so you know you're not just sort of pulling the puppet strings of that character?
Well, you'll find out quickly, won't you? You'll start to shoot it, or you'll play it, and there's an emptiness and a hollowness in it. And you think, okay, I'm not clear on what I'm doing. I don't mean to say that you're possessed or anything. It is a collaboration. But you know, one time I was living in LA, and this was after my daughter was born, so that was 20 years ago. And LA is a funny place because you go into an audition, honestly, there's the redhead, the brunette, the dark. It's the oddest thing. You think, wow, what's going on here? I don't know. I mean, I'm simplifying, and of course, it becomes Steve. I'm sure has some wonderful stories, but there was a slight emptiness to it all. And I would come home after auditioning, and I was as thin as a rail, mind you, knocking myself silly to get thin, in Laurel Canyon, running up those hills, and I couldn't get past to save my life. It was very funny. But anyway, I remember saying once, to find some meaning in these auditions one after another, I said a little prayer, if you will, and I don't mean it in a religious sense necessarily, however, whatever language one uses when you talk to yourself or just something. I said, would you please show me, before I go in the room, something about the character that I don't know? Would you just give me a little something? And each and every time it happened. And it was subtle, and they never would have known. I knew. And I thought, oh, darling, you can let go of the controls. There's another thing going on. And one time, because of the stage fright, it used to just level me to the point where on Broadway play, you're doing 8 a night, and it's Broadway, which is not overrated. It's a top-rated thing. You stand on a Broadway stage and think, is this happening? I'm not going on. I can't. But anyway, it was terrible. I did a play with the woman, it's called Taking Sides, Harwood. Wonderful. And the woman was looking for evidence that her husband even existed. She'd gone. Her husband was Jewish and died in the Holocaust. It took place directly after the war ended in Berlin. The poor woman, not a life you would wish on anyone. Anyway, it involved lying in a heap, in a rubble, for 20 minutes on stage, before then running into the scene and doing the scene. I'm a pacer. I've got to lie on the rubble. I'd rather be stabbed. Do you know what I'm saying? Anyway, this is too long. But the point is, I got very serious the stage fright. I'd wake up in the night and I'd just out of my skull say, I can't possibly do it. Can't go another night. I just can't do it. And so then I finished it somehow. I started meditating, not to preach, but it'll get the job done, trust me. Don't do it anymore because God forbid. I should learn from my past. But anyway, jump ahead, and then I went to do another play, and it all came back. The stage fright. This is 3 years later. I thought I left that in New York. This is in California. And I thought, I don't know what I'm going to do. And my friend said, oh, I know someone who's a psychic. I said, name, number. I was desperate. I'd do anything. And then when you live in LA, you know, that's not strange. You know, in New York, where life is lived seriously, you know, that's not strange. But in LA, he was like, did you see a psychic? Anyway, I thought, oh, I'm going to go. And at the time, I had 2 children. My oldest boy was in New York, and he is on the autistic spectrum. And my daughter, who was in a little carriage, 3 years old, was with me. I went into this woman's house, and this is a woman who had a gift. She'd never been to the theater in her life, she goes to the movies occasionally. She is a very every woman kind of person, just has a gift. Was grateful to have it and shared it. I walked in the door and she went like this, whoa, what's the fear? What's going on? She didn't even know I was there. What's happening? I said, oh. And she said, where's your other child? He has a disability. Where is he? So it wasn't like I was looking for proof that this woman had a gift. By then I thought, people do have them in. Just because you don't have that one doesn't mean it doesn't exist, you know. So I had accepted that and was very grateful. And so we got to speaking, and this is how she did it. Do you mind my saying all this? This is off topic. She talks to your angels and your guides. So say you're me. And she would go like, she said, do you know your angels and guides? I said, I don't. She said, well, they're always with you, all the time. And so she said, I'm going to speak to them and I'll tell you what they said. So the issue was the stage fright. She would go like this. Okay, what can you say more simply? Because oh, okay, okay. They're saying that you have so much fear and you are trying to control the audience. And the help is coming to you from everywhere. It's in the chairs that you're sitting on. It's from the floor of the stage. It's the scene partner in front of you. But you're so frightened of what they will think that you can't experience what's going on. And that rang so true. But the point I'm making in a long-winded way is that there's always help. And not in the most obvious ways, you know, in fact, in the least obvious ways. Who would ever think to say, I'm going to check in with my guide here and see what help I could get. I bet you'd get the answer. You know, speaking of grief, which Lindelof is brilliant, he asks us to sit with grief in the leftovers. Sit with it, not run from it. You know, you do want, don't you just want to say, well, can we talk about that tomorrow? But when my father died, he died a very long time ago, 40-something years. And it changed all of our lives. And 2 years ago, I said, my father's name was John. And I wanted to remember him the way he was, you know. He was a very kind and loving person, do anything for anyone. And we always celebrated the day of his death. We'd go to church or we'd do something. But I wanted to remember him on the day of his birth. So I said, would you remind me, please, of who you are? And then I went about my business in New York City, and I came out the door, and a man who was clearly homeless. You could tell, not just because of his clothing, but the loneliness that you can see in a human being from a mile away. And he said, could I pet your dog? I said, certainly you can pet my dog. And he began to tell me about dog and training, which you could see I needed. But he knew it from some kind of deep experience in his past, raising dogs. And finally I said, what's happening with you? What's going on? He said, well, I worked on the boats coming into New York, but then we got in and the and the skipper, is that what you call him?
Sure.
Was arrested for fraud, and he had been stealing, and they all got thrown off the boat, and he lost his cell phone. And he said, I can't get to my sister. They lived in Oregon or something. I said, but honey, can't you? We'll go to the computer. We'll find them. He said, well, I don't need a writer anymore. And I said, what do you mean you don't need a write? And he said, well, I was never taught. There was never time. We had a farm and so on. Everything coming out of his mouth, you know, break your heart. And he said, I just want to go home is the thing. And I said, of course you want to go home. You have the right to go home, or we're going to fix this. So we were trying to figure out, the Salvation Army was there, and I said, that's what they're there for. That's their purpose. So we talked for a while. So he went to leave. We had a lovely conversation. And I said, what is your name? And he said, John. It's my father's name. And I had asked to remember him, as I told you. And I kept saying to myself, never forget that level of existence that we don't pay so much attention to. It moves the day. And to make friends with it as an actor, to say, tell me something when you can. I'll wait. It's a great, aging is underrated because that happens with age. But you can skip all those years that I didn't skip and just go to that. Whatever you're doing.
Maybe it has something to do too with the ability to, so I guess the question I was asking assumed that we already are this one unified self that is completely self-contained and knows itself, and then wondering how do we split that? And that maybe that's a bad assumption to begin with. Maybe we are all of these multiple things, and what it means to be a self is this sort of postmodern notion of playing different roles at different times, and everything being a kind of performance because everything requires a different context, which doesn't mean that it's false. It just means that we're different sorts of people in different contexts and with other people around us. And the more that we embrace that there's this multiplicity to us, we can embrace also that there's a multiplicity of others. So we can see the homeless person as our father, because in some sense that is, right? That's somebody that we can love just as much as a family member. So it's a different ontology of the self maybe that's there that an actor such as you has really tapped into and can use to bring this fictional character to life. But in some sense, maybe it would help all of us to be more in touch with that.
That's interesting. I think I want to take your class, one. And you're far more educated than I am. You say things so beautifully. But yes.
You know, I'm teaching a class on philosophy and comedy right now, and it's cross-listed with the theater school.
Oh,
and
nice.
It's great. I have half theater majors and half people from LA.
Theater majors can use a dose of comedy. I've been theater school so hard. I mean, really hard.
Yeah.
Because you can't run, because you gotta go in. It's like, what? No. I don't want to. Not today.
One of the things that we're talking about there recently, this came about when you were speaking, is about the role of hope and hopelessness in tragedy and comedy. And hopelessness is usually associated with something that's tragic. Oh, it's, my God, it's just going to end up in a horrible way. And hope is always comedic. Oh, maybe it'll work out.
What's the tragedy one?
Hopeless.
Hopeless.
Right.
Okay. Listening.
Right. So, but one of the interesting things is we've been thinking about if that can be switched. And it was actually you're talking about your father passing that brought that to mind, because my stepfather was like my father to me, got cancer and passed away several years ago. And he would never accept that was happening.
Oh.
So up to the very end, he was full of hope and, you know, it only has a 3% survival rate, but somebody's got to be in the 3%. That's going to be me. And so there was never this moment where we could kind of enjoy the time that we had left. And it just occurred to me that there's, on some level, if there had been a kind of embracing of hopelessness, if there had been a sense of, oh, thank you. Yeah,
Not that you need it.
Please. Then that would have made some space to enjoy and be happy. And so it's not a hopelessness in general about everything in life, but just about what you're hopeful about, perhaps. That hopelessness, if you accept that there's no getting out alive for any of us, on some level, that we are pointed to death, and that there's something about Patty and the guilty remnant that makes sense. They don't want us to ignore the fact that death can happen at any moment to people we love, and it will happen to us. But we do all go through life kind of ignoring that. We get so worried and caught up on other things and not think about, why are we not thinking about that all the time? I think they focus on it to the point of believing that therefore there are no values in life. Everything's just meaningless if we're all headed toward death. And I don't think that's true. It should be just the opposite. It should be, well, it's all going to end, so let's make this really important right now.
Yeah. You know, that experience of the leftovers, when I first read the script, I thought, oh, God, 2% of the population just, no, they did not. I swear, I'm embarrassed to say that was me. I remember saying to Marcia McManus, Steve and I share a manager, wonderful person, and Gary Gersh, my agent. So I said, what do you mean that they're not going anywhere? And then I said, and she doesn't speak. Well, that sounds like fun. What an idiot I am. And so they took a beat, and I'm sure in their head they're saying, I didn't know we had such a dumb client. Sad. And so Gary Gersh, instead of saying, honey, why don't you give it another read, because you know what, it's pretty good. He said, well, I live in New York. He said, it's an HBO series shooting in New York. So why don't you give it another read? And he kept the sarcasm out of his voice, don't know how. So I read it again and thought, oh, this is interesting, I guess, isn't it? And then I went in for the audition and I thought, oh, I could like her. Well, 2 minutes in, when we're shooting, I'm so attached I can't see straight. Meaning, I'm all in. And I don't even know the degree to which I'm all in. Because that's what Lindelof does, and Parada. The depth of it, it's not a linear process what goes on there, as you know. And it grips you in ways that literally, I can't hear that music. I've never seen that episode. Well, for a couple of reasons. But let me finish the thought here, which is, by the time I found out maybe episode 6 that the character was going to do what she does. You'd think there was a death in the family, honestly. I was crushed. I could not believe that her character, I said, no, it can't be true. And the process of getting to this end, to this episode, this scene, I wish I could tell you how it was the same thing in my life. The thing that Patty was doing, which is letting go of attachment, of everything that you think defines you. Let it go. And I finally said to myself, I didn't even want to work on the episode. I was so upset that this was going to be the last one. I was crushed. And I cried for days, like a loon, walking the streets of New York. And I was like, oh my God. But finally, what occurred to me is, darling, this is the reality. This character is leaving. Embrace that. Let go. Let go of all the desires you have to remain in the cast, to remain in the show. Let it all go, honey. Learn from her. She is teaching you, line by line, the point. Could you just, please, listen? And so I was writing back and forth to Damon Lindelof, who's wonderful. He'll never tell you anything you don't want to know, meaning if you don't have questions, he doesn't answer anything. If you have questions, he gets right to the point. It's brilliant. So I love Yeats, the poet. And I have always loved that poem. O vanity of sleep, hope, dream, endless desire. The poem itself is extraordinary. I never knew what the hell it meant. I read it regularly, and I have no idea what it means. My husband, who's a lot smarter and is a poet himself, I was very attracted to this poem, and I said to Damon, I wrote it, I said, this is how I feel, O vanity of sleep, hope, dream, endless desire. And I sent it, and he said, could Patty say that in the episode? And I said, sure, well. But I didn't know, it was part of my process of letting go. I'm thinking, I don't know if Patty's going to be into this. So I said to my husband, what's the poem about anyway? And he said, it's about the end of the world. Can you imagine? But all the things we're talking about, and the things we attach to, and I didn't even know why I was attached to it. But that's what this is about, the end of the world. if that makes the slightest sense. Oh, and then, kind of a happy ending, which it's the leftovers, so we can't necessarily. But then I get an email after we do it, and it's okay. The day we shot it, it's in Saxon Woods, New York. It was raining so hard, I thought, okay, there's going to be flood warnings. I don't even want to get going out of the house. We're all going to have to turn around and go home. We got up there, somehow the crew put it all together, and Justin and I were sitting in a cabin deep, deep in the woods. And all we heard was the rain on the roof, and it was just the two of us. And we played the scene. And after the hours of shooting, we both came out and we said, it's a love story, isn't it, between them? And a love story is about intimacy, isn't it? I see you, you see me. I'm not running. I'm gonna stay. I'll hold you, you hold me. And we both had that same experience. That's why I don't watch it, because the joy of doing it, I'll just never get over that day. You put it all in there, you're scared to death. It's your last day on the set. And it was a magic day. Not magic that we didn't have a hand in, because one does have a hand in magic, right? Then I get an email after I've let go. I've learned the lesson. I get an email from Damon. I don't think I can let her go. Imagine. So after letting it all go, which is what one should do, then suddenly it came back. That sounds like a bad, card, doesn't it? Well, what's that kind of Hallmark card? Sorry. But anyway, yeah.
So you mentioned collaborating with a character. How important was for that scene collaborating specifically with Justin?
Oh, everything.
Yeah.
Because what he does, do y'all know Justin? You know his work and stuff? He's a doll. Well, he is, isn't he? But he's got an eye, he's very, very smart. He has an eye on everything. But you'd never know it, and then when it comes time to do the scene, because he knows what shot is going to play, what this shot is going to be used for. He just knows, he has a sense of these things. And then he just listens completely. So that's why you can do it as an actor. When you realize, oh, someone's holding all of it for you. All of the fear, all of the everything. Because in life, when you want something from another, like I want you to understand me, let us say, I'm not thinking about myself. That's not how human beings work, is it? We're wired to rely on one another. But you can forget that as an actor. You can go inside and do a little solo situation. That's a way of keeping control of the situation. Don't do it. But it's the opposite of acting, isn't it? It's just your own thing presented in your own way that doesn't have to do with the other person. So it's not real, if you will. I don't think. But at any rate, that's just an opinion. But he is fantastic. And he would do things like season 3, for instance. Don't know if you saw season 3. I had to sing a song. Patty too. Okay, Dave, this is long, very funny. And so I kept thinking, what's wrong with it? Why am I not getting it? I would just turn to him and I'd say, what's the problem? He'd say, well, you have to give it a beat. Just give it a beat. And then sing, problem solved. He was like that. Where he just said, well, if you want you, okay, try it. He's lovely.
Yeah.
Acting is as an art form, it just seems to be so complicated because it's also one of these art forms where it seems like collaboration is just inherent to it. So, not just with other actors, but you've got the director, you have a writer, all of these people providing. It's almost closer to being a classical musician when you have a score in front of you and then how you interpret it is important. But how do you think of that? Because I know we had Michael Shannon here a couple years ago, and he said he thinks that he's just like a journeyman. He's just there to make a director's vision come true, and he just needs to find the best way to do that. And Edward Watson, who's a principal dancer with the Royal Ballet, he was here once and he said that he feels that he's like an electrician or a carpenter working for an architect. That there's a choreographer and he just says, I want this thing over there, and his job is just to try to do it the best he can. But it seems like there's a lot more than that.
Well, I love the selflessness of that. I'm trying to think, do I have 1 ounce of it? The director's huge. Unless they're, yes. And the writer.
What do the best directors do for you?
you ever watch NYPD Blue? Did you? Because the audience is young, perhaps. Milch, David Milch. Flippin' genius, honestly. I did an episode of NYPD Blue and I couldn't wait to get there. I got there and it was a boys' club. Even though the director was female, she was not really the director. They were the directors. Now, Milch was not in the room. He doesn't come in the beginning. So you go to set, go in, you do a read-through. Then you begin to put it on its feet. You take the time. Then the crew comes in and they watch. And everybody knows where everyone's going. The actors were lovely. David Fran, Dennis Franz, lovely, all of them. But I was scared to death because I understood her emotionally, but that's a trap. Because you gotta know, what are you doing? What's the verb there? Because that's how we function. If you don't chart what does the character want, what's in the way, and what are you gonna do to get what you want, then you're relying on emotions, and emotions are not stable. They are a product of, I want something, do I get it, or do I not? It'll come on its own, but don't fiddle with it. You understand? But I had a sense of who she was in that regard, which was not helpful, but I couldn't figure out, what is she doing? Her husband, this character's husband, was a sergeant, police officer, was found dead in his car with his mistress from when you breathe in the exhaust. So it was a mistake. They fell asleep and they died. And so she comes in to get his benefits and so on and so forth. And the scene is all over the place in that regard. I didn't know what she wanted. So suddenly we have lunch. We've had this rehearsal and things, and I felt terrible about it. And no one was helping. They probably figured, well, that's her job, figure it out. I go into the trailer, I call my husband sobbing. I said, I can't do it. I can't go back in the afternoon to shoot it. He's like, well, I think you are going back. That's how it works, honey. So I came in, and at the last minute, David Milch, creator of the show, comes in, and he watches the rehearsal. And he couldn't have been like, he likes actors. You can tell immediately, which is a lovely thing when they like actors and don't consider us children who just can't get a hold of themselves. It's lovely to be liked a little, you know what I'm saying? Appreciate it. And he said, do you know what she wants? I said, I don't. And he said, she wants to protect her husband's honor. So in the playing of this scene, protect your husband. I tell you, we sailed through. And I was so grateful to him, I didn't know how to express it. Because that's it. Put us on the path of what do you want. If you can figure that out, all the self-consciousness went away. All of the worry. Suddenly I could have the conversation because I knew what I was doing there. And I got into our ratty old Jeep afterwards and I sobbed out of sheer gratitude for that experience of that man just saying, here's what it is. That's what a good director does. That's what writers help you with, in my opinion. I do think the director is going to be in charge, no question. I would only say in response to Michael Shannon, but he's probably right, that the character is saying something too. And we're the ambassador for the character. So you listen and you say, but how about this? Could we consider this? Do you know what I'm saying? To a director. Not that it gets to that.
Right.
That's always, doesn't end well. Right. But, so it's a lot of voices and it certainly is a collaboration. And the more I work, the more I need directors. It's never something that, nor should it, go away.
Right. And when you put that work, that art out into the world, there's some sense in which it comes to be through a collaboration with the audience too, because it's their interpretation as well. So it's not even completely finished in some way when
right, that's such a nice way to put it, yes.
And you don't know how they're going to interpret it as well.
Right.
They can see it in a completely different way than how you intended it.
guess the question is there a kind of frustration there, or is it kind of liberating? I was just thinking this because I was...
Liberating that.
Liberating that it's not all on you, that there's a good chunk of the meaning of the work of art that's going to be provided by other people, and you leave everything you can on the table, but then the final meaning of it has to do with other people bringing their subjectivity to it too.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah.
It's wonderful. In a way, and I don't, one of the other reasons I don't watch is that I don't feel compelled to watch my work. I would like to see my colleagues that I've worked with out of respect, or the director, to see the film or the thing. But somehow our job is, that's what we do, and then others do.
And you leave it there.
The first night you showed Candida. Candida was the first Broadway play I did. It was thrilling and terrifying, as I've said boringly. But on the way to the theater, my father used to take us to the theater. Broadway was the best thing ever. Couldn't believe it. We lived in a small town in Massachusetts, and he would take us. It was just thrilling. So to be on a Broadway stage, come on, just beyond. And he was long gone, you see. So I was on the way to the theater, and I had a little chat with him. I said, could you give me a hand tonight, because I'm terrified. And I'm really scared. It was our first night on the stage, going through it, and it just... And so I got there, and it's the only time it's ever happened. Just a little discouraging, because it's many years ago. I had a little chat with my father, and I went on stage, and something happened which was remarkable, and that is, it was a kind of shelf. I don't love the word shelf, and I can't think of another, between the stage and the audience, and I realized, oh, we're all one. There is no separation. You're doing your part, and I'm doing mine, but it's all part of the same thing. And so it was without fear of any kind. It was one of those miraculous nights where everything just floated naturally, went this way or that way, but no fear, because we were all in it. It was great. It's a memory, unfortunately, long ago. However, I aspire to that happening again. I hope I haven't bored you senseless with these stories.
It must be easier in the theater, where there's the direct, you can feel the energy and
It was
get how
terrifying.
that
You can't walk off and say, could I do that again? Saying, oh,
Right.
yes, terrifying.
If you think of something like Handmaid's Tale, which is so important in our culture right now, and the way it gets reflected back, the way it gets taken up, you have, but it gets complicated too, because you can have kinds of extremes where people want to use it for something, and you can understand that impulse. I've seen recently Commander Brett Kavanaugh meet, which, where
really?
where the Supreme Court as one of the commanders.
Yeah.
But then I also saw, God help us, that one of the new hot Halloween costumes this year is the sexy handmaid costume. Right, with the red thing, but it's low cut and this, like a mini skirt. You just think everything's been missed with something like that, right? That the response that art is getting from someone is to take everything that you think perhaps is the opposite of the core of the soul of that work, and yet that's out there.
Yeah.
And that's part of the not being able to control it after you leave it on the table.
And that's where you take your hands off, and you take your energy away from it. I don't pay attention to any of it.
Right.
I mean, I loved it when they stand outside there, Kavanaugh being, when he was lying with their red. I thought that was beautiful. I was so proud of him. I got sent 3 bottles of wine, and there was a Serena Joy and an Offred. and in Australia, someone had told me about it. I had been working in Australia in the summertime. And they said they took it right off the market because it was saying things like, you want a quiet, sexy night at home?
See?
And suddenly the people who, they're like, hello? No. So that's no longer being, yes.
Do you think there's a particular challenge to television or film work that's different than theater work, in that, I'm not sure exactly how to put it, but that there's the screen itself and the distance makes it more possible to think about what's going on in the art as something that you're a distant spectator from and therefore not implicated in. that we could look at it and say, oh, there's some bad people doing bad things, but it's not me. But there's something so visceral about the theater that somehow you feel more caught up in what's going on. Is
You
that-
mean as an audience member?
As an audience member.
Well, I
yeah.
think that is true, surely what you said about the theater, but in film and television, it's like an email. Forgive, it gives people space. Like that's a bad analogy, but when I found out about not that the character I was going died, Lindelof wrote me an email. People said, "He didn't call you." I said, "Thank God he didn't call me. I don't want to talk. I want to sob, and I want to read the email and sob." So that distance I appreciate. And audience members, a lot of women have said this, who have been in horrible sexual assaults, harassment. It gives them space to watch it in their home, let it resonate, and then some level of empowerment occurs in their own time, in their own space. I find there's great value in that. Distance, not, I mean, both could work.
Right, for sure. Maybe in different ways, right?
Yes.
I always think when people would compare Patty in The Leftovers to Aunt Lydia in Handmaid, I never quite got that.
I never get it.
Patty's not a villain in any way, and even Aunt Lydia's not a villain. She's trying her best to do,
Yeah.
but it always did seem to me that there is something they have in common, and that is that they both sort of found a way in a patriarchal culture that they don't answer to men,
Right.
right? And they found a way to commit themselves 100% to something they
Yes.
believe in. So there's a kind of empowerment even in that.
Yes, I agree, 100%. And they're loners. I don't think they're social creatures. I think Patty loves being alone. I think Lydia can't wait to get in that dorm room. With the light, it's not for reading. You know what I mean? She has the little meal with the aunts, and I think she's polite with them. She has no interest in their chatting with them. I think they're loners who found their calling and knew they could do it.
That can be a very empowering thing.
I should say.
Yeah. I can't wait until we see you in Joan of Arc.
Well, that was the kindest thing. I want to take that home, that whole thing. That was so lovely. There was a British actress, Dame something something. Sorry. And she said you can only be too young to play Joan. I don't know any theater producer who's going to sign me up, but she's lovely, Joan.
Thank you so much
Oh my
for being with us
gosh,
here
I'm
tonight.
so grateful. I don't
Thank you for coming out tonight, everybody.
Thank you, Patty. Take care of yourself.